I'm so tired of people saying that it's just a movie, it's just a comic book, it's just a TV show. Whatever. No, it's not. Stories are the building blocks of our culture, of ourselves, even of our own psychology. We are a product of the stories we tell ourselves about our own past and the experiences on a daily basis, but also the stories that we choose to spend time with. What types of values or feelings or whatever are they promoting? What types that we like to spend our time around? They're going to shape us. They're going to shape our personality and character, and they're going to shape our perception of the world and the acts and behaviors that we put out into the world. And people don't understand that. They go, it's just a movie. It's just this. I can like and promote whatever I want. Well, of course you can, but you should pay attention to the responsibility that you have.
Consume stories responsibly.
As a member of society, as a human being, responsibility to yourself.
Consider the consequences.
You need some balance. You need some certain criteria that is going to make sure you're promoting the right kind of works, or at least have thought through the type of work that this or that story is going to do in our culture, and then make your own decision whether or not that's something you want to support.
Consume stories responsibly. Consider the consequences. Consume stories responsibly.
Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Geek. Welcome back to the channel. Hope you pulled out that little Prof. Wolf intro that I had done way back when, using my very meager video editing skills, such as they were. But I like it. I like the music. I love the art that Nick the Brick did. So anyway, welcome. It's not Monstober yet, but it might as well be, for it is the Halloween season as far as I'm concerned. That's what we're doing. That's what we're celebrating. It's enough of this summer crap. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed. If you got a chance to watch either the episode 6 of the Iconicast podcast, or at least the cutout that I made from it, talking about the monsters of the Enlightenment. This is my beginning into talking about horror fiction, books, movies, and all of this. We're going to just kind of have fun with it. Have fun with doing a little bit of a deep dive into the study of it between now and Halloween. So it'll be fun. Let's see who we have here. Who is here first? I think over on YouTube. Take that comment down now. I guess Big Al was here first, or maybe somebody was here, but Big Al's the first one showing up to me. But welcome, Big Al. Darth Enigma, great to see you. Of course, my dear sweet sound engraver. Ace Moic, good to have you. Eldritch fan. Nathaniel Zalozball. Andre Hernandez. I did not hear that. That's a bummer that the My Hero Academia manga ended. I'd been watching the anime, not the manga, and I'm still way behind on the anime because I'm just savoring it so much, Might be broken now since I don't know how a great superhero story that doesn't have a complicated continuity like Marvel. Oh, you might be broken now. Gotcha. You don't have one. Now, when you say the manga's ended, was that just the main line? Because I know they had some spin-offs and stuff, There's like a prequel run and stuff like that, so. But that's a bummer. I guess everything has to end at some point. I'd rather it end than have them drive it into the ground and some of the woke nonsense West get a hold of it. That's for sure. Let's see. Imaginative Hobbyist, welcome. Alec Purdue, good to see you. Private Eye and Retrospectiva. Great to see everybody here. And so many, many more. Leia Plus Size, Final Fantasy fan. Great to have everybody. All right. So, let's see what's going on here thus far. Good. Glad everything sounds good. Everything's coming through. I'm going to do my best here. We're going to talk about some... Hey, my glasses. These screens are killing my eyes. The episode 6 of Iconicast podcast was so late, there was no August episode. I guess technically it was released on the last day of August, but that's what I consider the July, or the I'm sorry, there was no July episode. Technically, I think it was released on the last day of July, but it was considered the August episode. And one of the reasons for that I said that in the podcast episode, of course, scheduling and all of that, but also I really wanted to take the time to develop and just really make sure I had research refreshed and notes taken and everything, and just be able to speak coherently about the topic. And I pulled that off. Well, I mean, you can tell me if you think it's engaging or not, or interesting or not, but I pulled that off well for the podcast episode. Now, in terms of podcast episodes, covering the Halloween horror, fiction movies and stuff, we've only got the September episode left and then the actual October episode. But as I said there, I'm actually going to supplement it with some content on, some of the weekly live streams, like the office hours tonight, and, doing some random videos and stuff. So, I'm just having fun with it, really digging into it. And it's just fascinating stuff. It really is. So I will try to be as coherent as possible tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about Gothic fiction, and we'll see where that goes. And there's a lot to say about Gothic literature. Again, this is a subject that you could teach a couple different semesters on, depending on which area of Gothic literature or whatever you focus on, which authors and everything. Certainly there are semesters upon semesters. So I'm just going to talk some about the origins of it and some of the influences that we have still with us today from this. I'm dealing with dates. You know me, I got to have my notes. Stupid numbers. So Gothic literature actually predates Romantic literature. If you're being specific or strict about, Romantic period and Romantic era, Gothic literature really predates it. The first Gothic novel is considered to be Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto, which was 1764. Now, if you watched either the episode 6 of the Iconicast podcast or the little cutout video I did, The Monsters of the Enlightenment Part 1, you know that we're dealing with, to a large degree, a reaction to the Enlightenment. So remember, the Enlightenment comes about after the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and the Enlightenment is about privileging rationale, logic, really going after things scientifically. The whole scientific method is eventually developed and so forth. And specifically in Europe, or especially in Europe, I should say, it's very much characterized by a rejection of religion. As I said in the podcast, that's not so much the case over in the United States, because we certainly were founded on Enlightenment principles. As I said, all of our founding fathers, had some sort of touch with the Enlightenment, if not really strong figures of the Enlightenment, like Thomas Jefferson, at least some sort of touch with it. And a lot of our founding documents and principles and things that are still with us today as a country and as a culture, certainly we get from the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment's still with us big time today, period, just in the world. But in the United States, we never really divorced Enlightenment ideals from the idea of a creator God or from the idea of religion at all. Later, when the French were having their revolution, they were reacting against tyranny and being controlled, and there was certainly corruption in their monarchy. There was also corruption in the Catholic Church that had, at least the Catholic Church there, governing over France, here and there. So there was a real like an atheistic reaction to religion in Europe, especially in mainland Europe. Didn't really have that in the United States because we were already a nation, even in the colonies, of so many different religions, so many different Christianities. Catholicism, Anglicanism, the Congregationalists, the Puritans, the Quakers, and Dutch and so forth. So it was more about religious freedom to practice whatever religion you wanted to, or none, if that's what you chose. So it is a little bit different if you grew up hearing about the Enlightenment from sort of the American history perspective. You might not quite understand the import of it, and how anti-religion and anti-God or anti-anything supernatural it was. But here we've got the first Gothic novel coming out in 1764. And Gothic literature, it's characterized, it really was a precursor of the Romantic period, because we talked about how the Romantic period in that episode, specifically the first generation of Romantics, the Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Wordsworth, Blake, they very much were saying, hey, no, you can't just disregard any idea of the soul or of a supernatural, a world, a life, hereafter, a creator God even. Sometimes that's characterized all the way into Christianity by some of the Romantic writings. But Gothic literature started to voice that sentiment to some degree or another before the Romantic era. It's called Gothic literature. It gets its name from The Castle of Otranto, the first novel by Horace Walpole. He calls it, if you look at the original title of it, he calls it The Castle of Otranto, a Gothic story. In Gothic, he's meaning Middle Ages, the Gothic, the Goths and whatnot. There's a Gothic revival of architecture that happens around that era too. So Gothic basically just means that time period, of the Middle Ages. And he called it a Gothic story because he was hoping to pass The Castle of Otranto off as like, oh, this is a story that was just found. It actually comes from the Middle Ages of Europe, that kind of thing. But the name stuck, and of course all these novels that poured after it, so many different. It was the it was the popular fiction of the time. Now we've got sort of the ones that stand out to us. You might have heard of Anne Radcliffe with the Mysteries of Udolpho, The Monk, the Matthew Lewis, Vathic by Beckman, I think was his name. There's a bunch of others. You can take a whole semesters on Gothic literature. And it's certainly still with us today. Of course, in the United States, Gothic literature developed a little bit differently. Poe and Hawthorne were the first to really start tackling it. But it's going to be slightly different in the United States, remember, because we don't really have a huge atheist movement to react against. And by atheist, I'm talking about not necessarily, the Gothics are Christians and they're reacting against the atheist enlightenment. No, Gothic literature is wanting to re-embrace the supernatural, to re-embrace ideas of the soul or of something out there, powers out there that maybe the natural world and all of your science can't quite totally explain, So there's a lot of stories about, ghosts and things like that. So, certainly Poe in America, it went on to be the Southern Gothic, that was a branch of genre that developed from it with Faulkner, Flannery O'Connor, and so forth. And as we'll see, Gothic literature still is very much a part of all of our horror films, whether that's just sort of the ghost story, the paranormal, or, even like into a slasher film. The Gothic literature is still there. So Castle of Otranto, many of them develop, and there's some certain tropes that develop in Gothic literature. Some of them do sort of set the time period back in the Middle Ages, The Monk, Castle of Otranto, and so forth. A lot of them, though, even if they're technically set in a different time, there's still this sort of clashing of the times. There's quite a common theme is to place characters from the contemporary setting of the late 1700s, 1800s, and so forth, to place them in an old castle, an old structure. This is like the first thing that has to be there for a Gothic fiction. An old castle or an old manor, a family home, in America, because we don't really have castles over here so much, an old mansion, an old manor, an old structure of some kind, an old tower, an old something like that. And this is certainly goes all the way into Frankenstein. When we get to some of the major archetypal horror stories we're going to be talking about, we've touched a little bit on Frankenstein. We've looked forward to Dracula. I mean, we have the Castle Frankenstein, even though it wasn't as prominent in the book, there was an actual Castle Frankenstein that influenced her. And when it went on to Universal and into the monster movies, Castle Frankenstein, it's the big lone watchtower that Victor, or Henry Frankenstein, creates the creature in. There's Castle Dracula, of course. That's certainly in the movie, in the books, and so forth. So there's always this old structure. And the old structure itself is just this big multivalent symbol. It can really signify a bunch of different things. On the one hand, it can be looked at, depending on the story, as sort of the human psyche. I mean, there's always these tunnels and under passages, and secret doorways and whatnot, going into the subconscious and so forth. It can certainly be looked at, from more of a Freudian perspective, into the psychosexuality. Uh, it's also just on a more surface level, a picture of the past. You're dealing with an Enlightenment era that's trying to reject the past, the Middle Ages, and all of that religion and all of that stuff. We're men of the Enlightenment now. We're men of logic. We're men of all this kind of stuff. The empirical people, Well, the Gothic story by nature is putting somebody like that or people like that in this setting where they're in this old castle, for example, with these secret doorways and these haunted aspects to it and whatnot. So it's basically an assertion that you can't get away from the past. Sometimes the Gothic literature might be saying something about how corrupt the past was. Quite often, family lines and hierarchical power structures and whatnot had corruption and passed down this or that, and these are things that the current generation, when the story, has to deal with and straighten out. That's a very common theme, so the past is kind of screwed up, but even so, we can't get away from it. We can't just escape it. We can't just say, we're not dealing with that anymore. We're men of the now and whatnot. It's always there, and you have to deal with it. And it's also got it has a long reach, a haunting reach. It will haunt you, quite literally in the case of supernatural elements in the stories, but certainly in its effects upon you. And you have to deal with it. Now, one common, not in every Gothic literature or Gothic story, but a common thing that happens quite often is something happens to that structure, the house, the castle. Sometimes it crumbles altogether. You think about, the on the nose example of that is The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. The whole house is collapsing there, stuff like that. But that's sort of an image of justice, of an overcoming of this of these wrongs that were done or whatnot. In England, with English Gothic fiction, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit here for a second, because this is, of course, what Mary Shelley's Frankenstein would be considered. She's a British and English author, and certainly Bram Stoker, an Irishman there, a Briton, and Dracula. Robert Louis Stevenson with The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. These three novels right there really give us our trinity of horror icons, archetypes that I would argue are the foundational horror archetypes, that if you don't understand these three archetypes, the vampire, the creature, the creation, or the dual identity, if you don't understand the three of those, vampire, Frankenstein, werewolf, then you don't really have a good understanding of horror at all, because it doesn't matter if you're dealing with like a current day slasher film or paranormal investigation film or whatever. You need these you need these three archetypes, and they all came to us in literary masterpieces between the 1800s. There, you got Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, just even like a novella by Robert Louis Stevenson, and of course Bram Stoker's Dracula. Eldridge fan, thank you for the super chat there. Yeah, the rats in the walls, Lovecraft's great Gothic. Yeah, I'm not a big, like I said before, I'm no kind of aficionado on Lovecraft. Certainly know of him, know what he did, know why he's important, but I don't know enough about him to really give you an analysis of his work and whatnot. I know you've asked about it a couple times here and there, but yeah, anything like that you see, feel free to throw out there and point out, because he was a great devotee of Poe, and he certainly carried that Gothic tradition into the pulp era of the early 1900s, definitely. Now, in English Gothic literature, one of the things that a lot of scholars will say it's characterized by an anti-Catholicism, and there is a rampant anti-Catholic vein and theme in specifically English Gothic literature. Now, it's not in all English Gothic literature. I would argue it's not quite as prevalent as some people think it is. Certainly somebody like Anne Radcliffe, that woman just hates the Catholic Church. But it would make sense for that kind of theme to be there in the English literary Gothic, because the English is just, they're nationalistically Protestant. It was you do not want to be a Catholic in England at certain time periods in the history. My goodness, and if you were, you did so secretly. It's heavily believed by a lot of scholars. I certainly agree with it that William Shakespeare was a Catholic, in disguise, Catholic undercover. You see those themes in his work, and I mean, you were put to death at different times in England's history if you were a practicing Catholic, because they broke from the Catholic Church, and the monarch, depending on who was on the throne at the time, their power, their claim to power by divine right and so forth, had to come by their definition of the Christian Church, which became the Anglican Church once it broke away from Catholic Church. So it was a big deal. Around this time, around like Anne Radcliffe's time, for example, you do have the Catholic Emancipation Act, things going through where, you can practice, as a Catholic, but you're still a second-class citizen for all intents and purposes. So it makes sense that there would be sort of an anti-Catholicism vein in some of the English literary Gothic works. Even so, though, something like Matthew Lewis's The Monk, for example, you've got, one of they love to talk about sort of a corrupt monk or a corrupt priest or, something like that. Well, newsflash, priests and monks are human. And if you're trying to think of some source of monstrosity, whether this is a character that becomes a sorcerer or a character that sort of opens the door for some sort of supernatural demonic influence or whatever, I mean, it's hard to think of a more tragic choice than somebody who's taken the holy orders and actually devoted their very life to the service of God and church to suddenly, go back on that. So it makes sense that would be there. The point, though, in all of Gothic literature is that it is very much a harbinger of divine justice. Even in The Monk, which has these, this particular monk, just doing these horrible tragedies, sexual, violent, just all these kinds of things, divine justice takes place in the end. The literary genre, the literary genre of the Gothic tells us that there's a right and wrong. No matter what you think scientifically about it, there's a divine right and a divine wrong. And sometimes even the so-called anti-Catholic literary Gothic or Gothic literature, I think, if you look at it in the right angle, it's actually very much confirming, if not a Catholic structure, the fact that there should be or needs to be or is a spiritual hierarchical authority on earth even, the way they're written. So, going on and on about that. But, again, the English literary Gothic is just sort of a short cut of that. Before I talk specifically about, let's say Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Dracula, or Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, there's one little aspect or one sort of offshoot of the Gothic literature that I think is important to note because I'm interested in how it develops, especially in the United States. I mentioned Anne Radcliffe. She's one of the authors that gets named or is considered Gothic literature. I have a hard time actually considering her Gothic literature because Anne Radcliffe, The Mysteries of Udolpho, some of her other works, one of the key aspects of her work is that whatever the supernatural element is in the story, it's always explained in the end. It's kind of like a Scooby-Doo gang moment, we're like, oh, we thought it was a ghost, but it was really you pretending to be the such and such because you wanted the inheritance from the treasure and that kind of thing. And that's fine. I love it in Scooby-Doo. But if I'm supposed to be reading Gothic literature, I don't want the supernatural explained away. I think that I hate her work because of that, actually. So that bugs me a lot. But one of the things that her stories in particular, with that sort of, okay, it's something presents itself as supernatural, and then we need to figure out what's really going on behind it, it turns it into a mystery, right? Scooby-Doo would not be around if it wasn't for Anne Radcliffe's particular Gothic literature. And I think that's really cool that it sort of develops into detective fiction. Now, Edgar Allan Poe would be the one to actually make that full transition because he himself was a Gothic author, writing very Gothic, very supernatural, twisted, terrifying tales. And he also turned that into writing mysteries, The Purloined Letter, Strange Case of M. Vandemar. What's the other one? The cigarette girl influenced one. I can't think of right now. But, of course, Murders in Rue Morgue, these his Monsieur Auguste Dupin, which was a prototype for Sherlock Holmes. So he developed detective fiction that comes out of the Gothic literature. I just think that's interesting to note, even though I don't think detective fiction should be considered itself Gothic literature. It's heavily influenced by, it can have certain notes of. Now, I haven't yet really talked about some of the big identifiers of Gothic literature, such as the atmosphere, a sense of the sublime, that this overwhelming beauty, depending on whose definition of sublime you take from different philosophers and authors. It kind of can be a little bit divorced from beauty and be so overwhelming that it's almost sort of an awe-struck fear, even. But this overwhelming sense of that, and it often comes from nature. And when you twist that, you're going to bring about horror, like in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. You're twisting the nature of the self, the human being, the psyche, the duality. There is a darkness within you. If you keep denying it, that's the great message of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, is that there is darkness within you. Don't just go around saying you're a contemporary man of reality and science and a modern man. We don't, we're in civilization. We don't just rape and murder our relatives and blah, blah, blah. Well, if you deny that shadow possibilities are within yourself, then you're just waiting for it to seize its moment and lash out. It's about integrating the self, which, we would argue is a healthy thing to do, the shadow and so forth. But The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde really gives way to the actual werewolf story. Of course, stories of werewolves, predated that. But in terms of the literary setup there, construct, it's the idea that, ultimately in the wonderful Universal film, even a man who's pure of heart and says his prayers by night can become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms in the full autumn light or full moonlight. I forget what it is. So even the best, most well-intentioned person out there, if you don't acknowledge and put to work your dark side, the werewolf will strike. It's coming for you, and for those who love you or who you love, because it's inside of you, it's terrifying, so that's there as well. Dr. Y for Super Chat here. Poe's Telltale Heart could almost be reimagined as a Columbo episode. Oh, absolutely. Now, Telltale Heart, I think it has been done some sort of more detective aspects to it. That was a great horror story. Didn't really have it's almost like the killer's confession, right? There's not so much a mystery the way it's written, but yeah, you could easily reimagine it like that, definitely. The interesting thing about Dracula, and we're going to go so much far deeper into these novels between now and Halloween, and this is something that has stuck with a lot of horror stories, certainly a lot of Gothic fiction. You've got this unholy monster, Dracula. And depending on the different tellings of Dracula, especially the ones coming after him, he's either, Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler, who sold his soul to Satan somehow to get these powers and become this otherworldly creature, or he's, the Nosferatu was an actual, like a creation of a demon or somebody who made a deal with a demon and all these kinds of things. Yeah, it goes on and on. But you got this unholy, very satanic villain. And you would think that, okay, well, the hero's got to be, who can combat that, but a holy character then, whether an archangel himself or a priest or somebody like that. Yes and no. This brilliant character of Dr. Van Helsing develops, who's a fascinating character. I love the character of Dr. Van Helsing, specifically in Bram Stoker's Dracula, because he's a doctor. On the one hand, he's a man of science, but he's not a British man of science. He's Dutch. And he's also a Catholic. And he not only believes in science and galvanism, and he's on top of all of the modern practices, but he also knows the superstitions. He knows the vampire tales from Scandinavia or Bulgaria, where they originally came from, and he knows these things, and he knows these superstitious sort of folk practices that actually work, as well as the actual Catholic accoutrements. He uses holy water. Does he use holy water in the first novel? I know he uses the host, the Eucharistic host, And you think, okay, how does this man have access to the Eucharistic host? Because technically, you have to be a priest to even have access. Now, maybe he got it, maybe he stole it. Who knows? I mean, I don't think he would steal it because he's a, he's in that aspect of him, he's a very holy man. But there's all kind of speculation. Was he a priest in his day before he, for whatever reason, became a doctor or so forth? Who knows? Was he a seminarian, before he decided not to go that path? Who knows? But he's a fascinating character. So in order to combat the modern monster, Dracula tells you, and Dracula is so much deeper than this. I'm just saying one little thing that Dracula tells us is that the novel of Dracula, literary masterpiece as it is, tells you that it doesn't matter how modern and how godless your life or philosophy or outlook is. Real evil exists. Supernaturally anti-God demonic evil exists, and it's going to show up in some way or another. And how do we combat that in our modern world? Well, on the one hand, we don't just pretend that our science and our developments and our technology don't exist. We don't just do that. We don't just go running to whatever sort of folk remedy. No, we go ahead and practice our modern developments, but you can't deny religion, the tradition of religion, and just the tradition of our mythology. You need all of that to combat this. The unholy needs to be combated by God, and God is in terms of the humanity, to embrace God is sort of his side in this fight. In terms of a monster story, you have to embrace everything that humanity has developed and created. In terms of progress. I don't know if I'm being very clear there, but that's just something we could go a lot deeper in with Dracula. It's a great story. You certainly see the Gothic literature with us today in all of our horror films. You think about whether it's the Amityville horror, any kind of haunted house, movie, Carrie, any sort of, they've got this sort of old house, which is, even if it's just a, American made home, it's sort of got Gothic touches to the structure. You'll see that a lot. You'll see the aspects of the story just give you a sense of horror, of unease, even if it's, some college kids on a, alcohol fueled, party weekend or whatever. They at some point they have to cross over into a territory of the Gothic, whether it's, I'm thinking like, for example, the remake they did of House of Wax, which of course was nothing like the Vincent Price classic, but, the remake, you got people cross this threshold over into a horror, a Gothic influenced horror world. One of the reasons I'm not giving you sort of a bullet pointed list of the attributes of Gothic literature, I've mentioned some and I've talked about, generally what makes a good Gothic literature, is because if you talk about a formula for Gothic literature, it's kind of like the hero's journey. When you talk about, the stages of a hero's journey, it depends on which applications you're putting it in, depends on which comparative mythologists has come along and revamped the list a little bit. You can certainly always see the main stages that exist and, come up. But, certain this scholar or that scholar will tell you, well, there's actually this and there's also this and there's also this. I'm trying just to sort of distill things, into the main bits there. But it's certainly with us. Yeah, so I definitely would recommend, Castle of Otranto is a great Gothic novel, and it's very quintessential too, being the first. You'll see a lot of these there, and it's pretty fascinating stuff. It's not a incredibly long read. Some Gothic novels became long. I just finished, oh my gosh, Varney the Vampire, or The Feast of Blood. It's a vampire story that predates Dracula, and that's why it's so important, because a lot of the vampire, pieces of the vampire lore, some of which actually, develop in this Varney the Vampire story. But it was, and it's Gothic on one respect, but it was also serialized, in its publication through these little penny dreadfuls, where the authors would get paid for how many lines that they wrote and published. So, oh my gosh, every time a character stops to scratch their forehead, it's recorded, and there's no time jumps. We're going to narrate every moment, and then they woke up and they had breakfast, and on their way to go do this thing that they just said they were going to do, we're going to tell you about what happened there. And by the way, one of them was reading a book at the time, and here's the story that happened in the book they were reading, which is completely unrelated to the story, but because they just wanted to stretch it out. There's a hard copy now that you can buy and it's like it comes in a freaking box. It's just like so big because all at once you put together all the serializations together. But that's an outlier. Something like that existed because what people would actually have in their hand at any one given time was just the one little chapter, the one little increment of the serial. So in general, they're going to be short like that. Anne Radcliffe, she's a very verbose writer. Like I said, I'm not big into her story, but her Mysteries of Udolpho, it's a pretty thick one. But for the most part, they're not that bad. I mean, I've got here's an example: 3 Gothic novels, all in one little. This is an old edition, it's great. Castle of Otranto, Vathek, and John Polidori's The Vampire. So, they're not long reads. They're great. You can find them in their public domain for the most part. So you can find audiobooks on YouTube if you're not a reader, if you want to do the audio thing. Of course, Audible has a lot of great editions of it. But I recommend, especially now, August, as we're starting to go into the back to the school and in our wonderful Halloween fall, it makes its way here. Read a good Gothic literature. Read a good Gothic novel as a way of sort of breaking into the season. It'd be a great way to do it. And you've got all the monster movies you want and stuff like that coming up. But Gothic novels, or if you just want to jump right into Frankenstein or Dracula, they're Gothic as well. Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, of course, is great. It is a novella. I've got a couple different editions, and some of them, of course, it's good to get, with other tales by Robert Louis Stevenson, who was a very prolific author. I mean, he's Treasure Island, Kidnapped, The Black Rose, and so forth. But I love this little edition I've got just because of the artwork. Sort of like a edition you would get in like a child, but it's the full story too, believe it or not. So anyway, easy reads. I recommend them definitely. All right, so I'm done with my mini lecture class. Any questions? No, but I'll look at the chat now to see what's been going on, and I'll catch the super chats as well. Make sure I didn't miss any of those and stuff. But yeah, for American Gothic, like Elder Shan was talking about. Lovecraft, Dr. Wise talking about Poe. I mean, yeah. Southern Gothic's a little different. Southern Gothic doesn't always have the supernatural element. The Southern Gothic especially came about after the Civil War, when it's dealing with some of the in terms of United States and the history that we had as a government, as a country of the United States, the South had the bulk of the history because not only, you had a lot of the, and the dark history too with slavery and stuff, certainly, but you also had, Georgia being a slave or a prison colony for a time. I think it was Georgia. You had the Spanish influence, when they had settled parts of it, Florida and so forth, you've got all the different cultures that mixed in, Louisiana with the Acadians and so forth, Cajuns, the South was really the place to go for a deeper history, arguably. I mean, certainly you can look at places in the North, but a Southern Gothic story became more about the problems of the past, or the dark secrets or mysteries of the past. So you get the old Southern home and A Rose for Emily, by Nathaniel Faulkner. Go read that one. That's a short story. That's a Southern Gothic, and it is twisted, but it's also a literary classic. It's Faulkner, for crying out loud. It's great. All right. How long have we been talking? Not bad. 42 minutes or so. Let's see. My dear Sound Engraver says, I need to hurry through some Star Wars this month for Game to Marriage Shelley's Classic. Yeah, I keep telling Sound Engraver, hey, you need to read this, and that. And, she's like me. You get on a kick when you're just reading these type of novels, and it's hard to just, break from that. You're enjoying this and that, But I told her today, I was like, Frankenstein's not like you're not going to knock that out in a week, I mean, if you have all the time in the world to sit around and read, of course. But in Dracula as well. Dracula is a pretty deep, especially to our modern sensibility and modern readers. It's going to take some time to read. If any of you are thinking about grabbing that, you're not just going to read it the week of Halloween or something, if that's what you're thinking. Give yourself time. Darth Enigma says it's weird how those 3 vampire women are popularly referred to as his brides, when I'm fairly certain 2 of them were his daughters. Are you talking about Dracula in the are you talking about in the novel? It's never really revealed who they are, but or you might be talking about a different take on it, or a different story, or whatever. I don't know, or maybe you're talking about a different point of source that you have there. But it is interesting that you mentioned the Brides of Dracula, because another staple of Gothic fiction is the innocent maiden. And this is why I love Bram Stoker's Dracula so much, because it deals with the innocent and the not so innocent, or the corrupted innocent. Lucy Westenra, of course, is corrupted. She's the innocent maiden corrupted. I think it's safe to say sexually as well as infected by vampirism, which deals with the fear of blood infection and so forth. Syphilis is a big deal in that culture. We don't know about it as much today, but it was huge. It's amazing how quickly the cultural memory goes by. Like, in the 80s, AIDS was at the forefront of everybody's mind. AIDS was just a big deal. You got AIDS, you died, period. And then as soon as medical advancements happened a little bit, suddenly, like, no one even knows the word. A kid today wouldn't even know what it is, I don't think. So you have to really, when you look at any of these novels, to best understand how they still influence us today, you have to go back and see the cultural context that really gave it such cultural impact and made it such a staying power in its time first. And then you can understand how those anxieties translate and develop and progress to all the things we have today, seemingly divorced from what was going on back then, but there is a paper trail. The Imaginative Hobbyist says, hello, Professor Geek. Are you familiar with the Showtime series Penny Dreadful? Starts off pretty strong, but takes a downward spiral after season 1. Great acting, though, especially Ava Green. I do know Penny Dreadful, and what's the other one? American Gothic, I think, or was it American Horror Story? American Horror Story was the other one. And I like the idea of both of those series. I haven't really watched much more than a couple episodes of either, just because of the fact that you just outlined. These are coming about in a time where good television shows are hard to find with any staying power. I don't know exactly when the dates. I think in the 2000 teens, if I'm not mistaken. Those were shows from the 2000 teens, and that was an era where there were some great ideas, but it was so hard to find anything that actually holds through to the end. I think you had to have started in the 90s, or at the very least the aughts, to really dig roots. A good story, a television series to dig roots in, and be able to just be pretty awesome throughout its development. Every series is going to have ups and downs, but so yeah, maybe I'll check out maybe the first seasons or some different arcs within those series or something like that. But I do like the fact that they were trying to call attention to the old stuff, the tradition, the lineage of horror. And for those who don't know, when I say Penny Dreadful were these, that's what they were called, the little pamphlet stories, little dime novels, you might call them. Later they, got to be called dime novels or shilling shockers, at certain point when you buy one for a shilling, in England and stuff like that. But the Penny Dreadful, you can get one for like a penny, and it's just this little, at the time with money being what it was, and the economy, but a little pamphlet, and it was just that sort of popular schlock, fiction, shock value fiction. But just like pulp fiction that would eventually come on after it, we can look back and see some really good art that was done even in those. So that's the idea. Michael Scimbati, good to see you. I knew you would be in the chat talking about anything but, well, not anything but, I knew you were going to not talk about whatever I was talking about. Michael Scimbati is going to talk about Batman villains in particular. What you say? I'm not a fan of aspirational heroes, but I like watching mobster films. Law and Order, SVU, so Batman, Daredevil, and Punisher all fit into those worlds. Well, it doesn't necessarily say anything about you. That's a genre preference, because even the stories of Batman, Daredevil, and Punisher are still Batman and Daredevil anyway are still very inspirational. A Punisher can be inspirational in its own way. Punisher's a little bit more of a catharsis. I'm not a Punisher expert, so maybe some people will yell at me, "How dare you?" or whatever. But Batman and Daredevil stories are all about justice. Mobster stories, and so this will go more in toward the Punisher stories. This is a genre that's about the horrors of a lack of a justice system, or the horrors of a broken justice system. So even if it's not super happy endings and everything's all fine and everybody gets saved, it's supposed to, culturally, it's supposed to show you what happens when we don't have good justice. And there's also quite often a big crossover between the mobster movies and and hero stories. The Untouchables. The Untouchables is brilliant. I know you. I hope you've seen The Untouchables. If you like mobster films, if you haven't, oh man, go watch The Untouchables. Yeah, so good, so good. Classic, classic. Every man should have watched The Untouchables at some point. Certain movies like you're not a man. You're not fully a man until you've watched The Untouchables, Tombstone. Certain films like that. Yes, I will. And thank you for the comment there, and in all your comments, your channel membership there, Michael Scabati. Appreciate that. But I'm not going to forget channel member Sound Engraver. My dear wife is doing a stream tomorrow talking about she's reviewing some of the Superman graphic novels. Yeah, she's been raiding my shelves and going through a lot of Superman stuff, and it's been fun to kind of revisit those stories through her eyes as she reads them for the first time anew. And my dear Sound Engraver is so great. She loves talking about anything that she's reading or watching. And this is what I love about her so much. One of the many things I love about my dear Sound Engraver is that she really experiences story. I remember a friend of mine, he was talking about how he was so frustrated with his wife because he wanted to rewatch Smallville from the beginning. And he told her, he's like, hey, I'm going to do this, but if you're not interested, no big deal. I can do it on my own time. I can do this. It's not a big deal. And she's like, oh, no, I'll watch it with you. We'll watch it. And he's like, okay. So they put it in, they're watching it, and he notices that, she's doing her knitting because she's like a cosplayer and stuff. She's knitting, she's getting the dog taken care of. And he's like, he pauses it and he's like, babe, if you're not interested in this, we don't have to watch this. Really, it's not something I need to watch right now. I can do it. I'm like, no. I'm watching. No, I'm listening. I hear what happens. Yeah, go ahead. And she's just clearly doing anything but paying attention to the story. In our today's culture, that's just sadly, that's how so many people, watch a movie or follow a TV show or whatever. They're multitasking with 5 different things. Heaven forbid they just focus on one thing. Our brains just can't. Oh, we can't do that in today's world. And that's what I love about my dear Sound Engraver is she. I mean, when we watch, TV, a movie or some series or whatever, I mean, you're going to watch it and you're going to really get into it. And you're going to talk about it. You may even go back and rewatch parts of it. So I love that about her. And she's brought that depth and that level of interest to the Superman graphic novels that she's going to be talking about tomorrow on her stream. So there's the link for it. You can check that out. Excuse me. My other channel member, I'm sure, make sure I get all the channel members in the chat. Samuel Proctor, thank you, sir. Said, have you gone into what kinds of horror were around before the Gothic era? You mean in terms of fiction novels and such? I mean, I of course you can, somebody might say, okay, well, horror goes back to like Dante, definitely. There's certainly an influence we can see from like Dante in horror. But I don't think before Gothic fiction that we had any sort of single genre that really, encapsulated horror. Like you can look at the Gothic literary genre and know that you're going to get some horror from that Gothic literary genre. Otherwise, if you look at something like Dante, the genre of it isn't horror. It's an epic poem. It's a theological. Well, it's not trying to be theologically true. It's a poetically, a lot of poetic license in there. But it's more of a moralistic epic. Because with the Purgatorio and the Inferno, there's also Paradiso. So it's not just all of that. But yeah, we can look at certain places in mythology. Yeah, did you have a certain source that you were thinking about, Samuel Proctor? So go ahead and throw it out there if you were thinking about something else. But I pretty much started, in terms of my exploration between now and Halloween, I pretty much started at the Gothic and / romantic era. Is because I'm going to go into like the universal monsters, and I specifically really want to dig into those 3 archetypal monsters more so than I've done in the past: the vampire, Frankenstein, and the werewolf. Where they come from, how they're still speaking to us, and so forth. Let's see. Andre Hernandez said, well, Smallville isn't great things. This is way too long. From my understanding, this was like even in the first season, like even in the whatever. It wasn't necessarily a product of it being, too long or too, drawn out. This woman just wasn't paying attention to it at all. All right, let's see. Good. Glad you read The Untouchables, Michael, or saw The Untouchables, Michael Scavati. I knew you'd like that. Okay, you said you were just. Whoa. Shoot. Hang on. I accidentally magnified my screen. This touchpad gets all kinds of weird. Come on. Oh, there we go. Okay. Samuel Proctor said, I guess there's always been monsters in stories, just not feeling that Gothic started. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Gothic literature had a certain, because of the cultural anxieties that it was going through, trying to look back and bring in that Gothic feel from the old stuff. Yeah, definitely. Man, what did I do to the screen? Did I mess this up? No. Okay. I'll figure it out later. Ah, where'd it go? Shoot. Darn it. There we go. Okay. I'm back. Yeah, I never left you guys, I know, but the screen was just being dumb. Sound engraver just let me know my mic cut off. Yeah, I was having some screen issues. I don't know how long. Hey, how long was it off? Okay, just a few seconds. Thank you. Yeah, no, I turned it back on. You let me know in the chat over there. Yeah, it muted myself. This touchpad is so finicky, and I did something to the screen, and it shrunk, and then it jumped over to some other options or screen options or whatever, and I think that muted the mic. But I'm back now. So yeah, what I was saying before I get to the super chat, I see Omega's Batman is pretty Gothic. Yeah, Batman is the Gothic detective. That's his archetype. If you don't have good Gothic feel and a Gothic sense of aesthetic and in the story, then yeah, you're not doing Batman right at all. That's why I can't stand. It's controversial. Don't say it. But I'm gonna say it anyway. Scott Snyder has no business writing Batman. Scott Snyder wants to write RoboCop. And yes, you can look at like the Court of Owls and some really cool arcs that he's done that's had some cool ideas, sure, but stop giving him the run. A good Batman writer needs to fully understand the Gothic. And I think Court of Owls, I don't know, it's been a while since I looked at it, had a lot of the good Gothic in it, but it's just not a staple that Scott Snyder wants to stick with Batman. Anyway, sorry, hobby horse. Let me get to my super chat here. Alec Purdue, thank you very much, sir, for the $5. Appreciate that. Said, where does the creature of the Black Lagoon fit in with the Universal monster archetypes? Yeah, because when you think about the Universal monsters, you think obviously, in terms of the archetypal Universal monsters, which go on to be sort of Universal horror, not Universal, the picture company, but Universal archetypes. Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, and then you would throw in the Mummy and the creature of the Black Lagoon. Those were the classic Universal films. And the Mummy starts to look into anxieties about mishandling our heritage, mishandling our past. Certainly a lot of Gothic in the Mummy stories, especially the Hammer horror Gothic. Mummy was great. Mishandling our past, mishandling our things that are tradition, our values, mishandling the sacred. And likewise, the creature of the Black Lagoon is mishandling nature, is pretending that we as humanity can do whatever we want to this creation. We can explore wherever, we can develop wherever, we can do whatever to wherever. Because the creature of the Black Lagoon is talk about a tragic monster figure. The Universal monsters, with the exception of Dracula, but maybe like Son of Dracula, you get a little bit more of this in there. But they're imbued with such pathos, from Frankenstein and so forth. Certainly the Wolfman, being a victim of his own, this curse, and the Mummy and so forth. But the poor creature of the Black Lagoon, man, he's just minding his own business. Then this really hot girl starts swimming in his pool, and he's like, "Hey, check you out. You came to me. I didn't come to you." And then everybody's like, "Monster!" So, yeah, but it's the anxieties over and the consequences over mishandling nature. So, good question. Yeah, thanks, Alec Purdue. Appreciate that. All right, not going to be on here for too much longer, but wrapping things up here as we get in. Let's see what else is going on here. Omega Blade is also Gothic. Now, I don't know. I'm not a Blade. I don't know nearly as much about Blade as I do about Batman. My understanding and my comic Blade encounters really exist in the scope of this graphic novel that was released, Marvel Horror. And when he first came out, he seems a little bit more of like a black exploitation, sort of like in the realm of Blackula, but a black vampire hunter, kind of like a Luke Cage when he was first, created, more of that sort of jive talking, kind of thing. But Gothic touches, and certainly in terms of being a vampire hunter, being in horror. So yeah, but I'd have to know more about that. I'd have to read a lot more about it and study a little bit more. Let's see. It's like Michael Schimbudi and Final Fantasy fan chatting there. A couple more here. Samuel Proctor said, there's a great YouTube video that goes into the pre-Dracula vampire literature. Yeah, I'm going to get there myself. We're going to talk about, the vampire is interesting because we think of it in some ways, we just sort of assume that it's the oldest monster, but it's actually the most recent monster in terms of like, the first vampire stories in terms of like an actual creature called the vampire came in Bulgaria. And that it was after werewolf trials, it was after the witch trials, it was after all these things, the first creature they called the vampire. And it was more of a supernatural ghost like. It wasn't even until the Holy Roman Empire wars came through and they brought it into mainland Europe and eventually made its way to England. We'll talk about that. But there are stories and whatnot. We're going to talk about John Polidori's The Vampire short story. We're going to talk about Varney the Vampire. We're going to talk about the influences that Bram Stoker looked at. I still maintain, though, that the vampire didn't get his literary masterpiece to solidify him into culture until Bram Stoker, even though the other things should certainly be looked at, definitely, as you say there. Michael Schimbudi, Archetype, Daredevil's Kingpin. There's a lot of people there. I could talk a lot about that. There is sort of, in terms of just the Kingpin, I'll say, there is sort of the, and Kingpin's a Marvel villain too. You see him a lot with Spider-Man as well, but there is sort of that Godfather-like, archetype. It's a Lex Luthor, same Lex Luthor type, in that they're the legit businessman villain. They're a product of corruption in America, corporate and political corruption, both. It's not just one side or the other. But yeah, they're in a whole interesting archetype. You could dig into them big time. Private Eye in Retrospectiva says, ever played Faith? It's an Atari-style game about a Catholic priest that tries to regain his faith by facing some of the most terrifying monsters ever. No, I have not. Was it on the Atari, or is it what console did that come from? That sounds fascinating. I need to play this game behind me. Chakan. I never played it. I was just looking through all the titles on the retro box. Like, that looks pretty cool. So I gotta look in there. I gotta play that a bit. Nathaniel Zalozball, thank you very much for the $4.99 super chat. Said, the creature of the Black Lagoon seems to tackle mishandling nature and underestimating the primal forces of our world. Yep, I 100% agree. Definitely. Yeah, I've been, from my research, you mentioned Samuel Proctor, that was from the History Channel. I miss the days when the History Channel existed with some really good documentaries. They weren't, it was History Channel. It wasn't a college class, so you weren't really going crazy in depth. But they did a really good job of sort of giving survey level documentaries for a time of some historical events. I showed Sound Engraver a few years ago. I bought it because I thought it was so well done. Their series, a mini series they did on the American Revolution, but they did just even like a 1 hour long special on the French Revolution, which, that's laughable, right? Thinking you could fit the French Revolution and all the horrors and atrocities and political intricacies and cultural anxieties and everything, tensions of that into 1 hour. But, if you're going to do it, if you're going to just give us sort of a survey, knowledge of it, they did it darn well. I do miss those great documentaries. Yeah, the Forever Man, Alex Purdue. That's the one that's playing behind me. All right. Leah Plus Size. I know you're talking to Dr. Y here, but I didn't mention Anne Rice. She's an example of the Southern Gothic, which is very much also reclaiming the supernatural elements. So we're thinking Interview with the Vampire Chronicles, but her Mayfair Witches are textbook Southern Gothic, but also brings in the supernatural. Just saw you talking about Anne Rice there. I'm gonna throw that out there. Yeah, I don't watch Modern History Channel. I don't watch any channels. Closest thing I watch to a channel is on Pluto TV, which is the free app where you can just, their channels are just certain shows that you want to like that are just played over and over and over again, reruns wise or something. But here, Isaiah Parks. Modern everything sucks now. It's true. I am looking forward. I maintain hope for Beetlejuice 2. I was talking to Fan Man and Al. I think I even convinced Fan Man about it now. But as I've said before, Tim Burton has yet to go woke, at least to my knowledge. So it's not a matter of I'm not worried about him going woke. It's just a matter of, is the quality going to be there? But dang, those trailers look so good. It looks like he's nailing it. I was a little worried if Michael Keaton, no offense to Michael Keaton, amazing actor still, but Beetlejuice is a very physical role. I mean, you're jumping around. He's this trickster villain, and stuff. And, Michael Keaton's an older person now, and was he going to be able to do that, and stuff. And it looks like it from the trailers. It looks great. Winona Ryder is still just perfection in the role. So it looks good. I hope it is. I'm going to go see it as sort of my birthday treat to myself because it opens beginning of September there around my birthday. So alas, my dear sound engraver is not going to go see it with me. It just looks too, sort of out there, maybe sort of visceral for her, which I get. I think she should watch the first one with me, or at least give it a try. But again, I can't see. As my dear sound engraver reminds me, it is true. I cannot complain. I have a wife who reads my Superman graphic novels. Let me just stop right there. Full stop. That's freaking amazing. She watched the whole series of He-Man cartoons with me. She's watching Stargate with me right now. I have got nothing. She doesn't want to watch Beetlejuice. That's fine. She's pretty freaking amazing as is. All right, folks. Well, I've definitely past my hour mark there, and I'm ready to go relax a bit for the weekend. But I really had fun with this. I hope you guys, found it an interesting topic. I hope you're liking this sort of exploration I'm doing for the Halloween stuff. I really like it how you guys are bringing in your own interests, like Eldritch Fan talking about some Lovecraft and how it applies to this and stuff, and you guys, even Michael Scimbati, I don't know if you meant to link it, but mobster films, certainly linked to these, you could trace mobster films back to Gothic literature. Certainly you got plenty of stops along the way, but so I like it when you guys bring your interests in that, the things that you're into or whatever, and link it up, make it part of the bigger conversation. That's pretty cool. Even though I can't get to every comment, obviously. Dr. Tale as old as time, Beauty and the Geek. That's right. That's right. So, you guys, I hope you have a great night. Thanks for chatting. It's always fun. Good night to you, AL, and everybody. And, hope you guys have a good weekend. And I hope you guys pick up some Gothic fiction, even if it's a short story or even if it's just a YouTube video that has some Audible of it or something. Look into something like that between now and Halloween. It'll be worth your time. I guarantee it. That's all for now. Until next time, keep enjoying and digging deeper into the true blue hero stories and horror stories, I guess we'll say, that you love. Thanks for watching.